Hello everyone! Welcome back to Jongers by Nature. My name is Wizomi.
And my name is Tomato, and together we are.
Jongers by Nature, the podcast where we dive into the world of Fukumoto's manga, everything related Mahjong and more. And in today's episode, we have a lot of interesting topics to cover, specifically regarding Fukumoto's female characters. Maybe also catching up a little bit what we failed to discuss in the last episode. And we also are not going to be alone. But before we get to that, we have a few words from today's sponsor.
This episode is sponsored by Hazahome Retirement Community, a place where the grass is greener on the other side. Hazahome. You've worked hard and endured throughout your whole life, so now it's time for a rest. Book yourself in to the Hazahome to find a whole new level of security. The Hazahome is located underground to protect you from the elements of nature, and we arrange daily physical activities that provides you with a sense of purpose while preventing your body and mind from idly wasting away. The canteen is stocked with all kinds of delicious and nutritious food. You won't struggle eating your greens, believe me. Apply now with the promo code OTSUKI, that's OTSUKI beginning with 2 O's, and receive 5,000 perika, the currency used underground for relaxing fun games of chance such as bingo or Uno. But anyway, back to the matter at hand.
I thought we were going to stop doing the Hazuso sponsorship bit.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It is a bit old at this point. Just like the members of the retirement home, I suppose. But anyway, we are blessed today to be joined by two fantastic guests with us in the JBN studio. One of them is a very talented scanlator, none other than Mob-san herself, who has translated the Yami-Ma no MAMIYA series, and will be with us to discuss the series itself, as well as the representation of femininity in the series, which she should be well acquainted with because she's a woman herself. And another guest that we have is Kitsuta, another first-timer on the show. Kitsuta is an avid follower of Fukumoto manga and manga in general. He has a YouTube channel where he discusses this at length in a very eloquent way. So I thought he'd be a great fit to today's episode. So why don't we let the two guests introduce themselves? Mob, how are you doing? Tell us a few things about yourself.
I'm doing fine. As Tomato mentioned, I did the scanlations for Mamiya's volumes 3 through 7, and it also happens to be my favorite Fukumoto manga. I also really like Kurosawa and Nikaido, Helgolf, and I've been a Fukumoto fan for around 6 years now. So,
Peak Taste, nice to have you on board. Kitsuta, nice to meet you.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. One just quick correction. I am actually a trans woman. I go by she, her pronouns. So I'm also very excited to talk about this sort of intersection between femininity and Fukumoto. Like you said, I have a YouTube channel. I talk about anime, manga. I've been a big Fukumoto fan for quite a while now. I've been reading Kaiji since around the start of the Idiots in Helmets arc. And yeah, I'm really excited for this topic. I think it's kind of an area of his manga that has been underexplored, that he himself is kind of now delving more into.
Brilliant. I think you brought us two fantastic guests for today's episode, Tomato. And you know we do have one small tradition to keep up with. We need to discuss what we missed out on last episode. We're not going to linger on that too much because we do have the honor of talking about a little bit more of a deeper topic than usual. You know, the past episodes, they've been quite interesting, but it was all a lot about personal opinions, rankings and stuff. And just to conclude with this, you know, we were talking Kaiji in the last episode. I want to know from our guests what they think about Kaiji before Espoir. Mob, you want to give your 2 cents?
I am just going to have to jump in. There was one more thing which needed to be announced. So, viewers who are watching on YouTube, you may be wondering, when is the Mahjong gameplay going to start? I'm sorry to disappoint, but in this episode, there's going to be a nice little slideshow instead of Mahjong gameplay. The editing commitment was just much too high. However, if you were really dead set on watching some Mahjong gameplay while you enjoy listening to this podcast, why not fire up tenho.net or Mahjong Soul and play some Mahjong of your own? Or if you don't feel the need to do that, then just watch along. There'll be a nice little slideshow, or maybe do your own thing while you listen. Drive to work, do your laundry, sleep, exercise, whatever it is, take your fancy. So just there was one thing which I needed to say in case the viewer is kind of impatiently waiting for the Mahjong.
We never want to leave our audience hanging. You're right. But having said that, let's cycle to Mob. Thanks for that, Tomato. Kaiji before Espoir.
Pardon my rude interruption. Mob, go ahead.
Well, I personally don't have much to say about Kaiji before Espoir because I just kind of read it very quickly when it came out because honestly, I'm not a huge Kaiji fan. I know that's a little unpopular to say, but I'm not the biggest Kaiji fan. But I just read it just because it's another Fukumoto work to check off the list. But I mean, I did like the gamble, quote unquote, in it, the license plate thing. I thought that was very interesting. And I like the small little character that Fukumoto introduced. But other than that, I don't really have much to say about it.
All right. Kitsuta, your response?
I am aligned. I feel like it's almost notable in that it's not that notable, that Fukumoto had a chance to kind of mythologize his biggest character. And, this is the dramatic origin of Kaiji. Not really, it's just kind of like a little episode of his younger life. But it's nice. It's charming in its own way.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. It's also not what I expected it to be. I thought it would be a little bit more grand. I also did enjoy the gamble. Maybe I was not the only one who was enthralled with the simplicity of it. It reminded me, honestly, a little bit of like the airplane odd or even gamble from Usugoi. But let's not dive into that little branch. Tomato, how did you enjoy it?
Honestly, I can't even. When did it come out? I think somewhere between half a year and 1 year ago, something like that. I mean, when was it translated? Something like that, right?
Yeah,
it's been a while.
Half a year, yeah.
It's been a while since I've read it, and to be honest, I can't even remember what the gamble was, but I do remember the character. I forget his name.
I want to say it is. I don't. Was it Bongo? Was it something like this?
I think it was Bongo.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously of foreign descent. It was nice to see how Kaiji treated him kindly, kind of the same way he treats a lot of strangers kindly, like Ishida when they're like behind the one-way mirror on the Espoir, like his fellow 45ers in debt. Yeah, Kaiji seems to default to treating people with kindness, especially people who are underdogs, people who are in a tough situation. So Bongo, being a foreigner, not really knowing what Japanese not being his first language, him not really knowing how Japan works, right? And like trying to be exploited by what was it? Some kind of tourist trap, right? And Kaiji steps in and looks out for him. It's very, very fitting of Kaiji's character, and it was nice to see them strike up a friendship. That's all I really remember. Not the gamble, but like the nice way Kaiji treated this stranger.
And it is in fact also comparable to the rest of the Asian three, with each of them being foreigners as well.
So, yeah, that's what I was thinking. you brought up the foreigner aspect, that he doesn't treat Mario or Chan any differently.
Oh, so quite a cute little addition. Thanks for giving your guys' input, but I think it's more than about time for us to dive into today's actual topic. And as Tomato mentioned, we have Mob here, so there is no other thing we could start out with than discussing Mamiya.
To get such a valuable guest. Be grateful, audience. Calling in many favors from afar.
Mob, tell us about your experience with translating Mamiya and also why you enjoy it so much.
So let's see, Mamiya came out in 2019, right? And around that time, so Mamiya is a high schooler. She's in high school. And I also was in high school in 2019. I was 16 around the time. And I remember when the one shot was first circulating, the images for it, I had just read Zero, the first part of Zero, and I thought she and Zero look really similar to each other. So I was like, oh, I wonder if she'll be similar in nature to him. And then I read the one shot, and now I'm a little bit stupid sometimes. So I didn't even realize she was a girl in the one shot. And it wasn't until the end of the first chapter when you actually see that like full panel shot of her when she's talking on the phone to Osamu, that I was like, oh, she's a girl. And then my interest was piqued after that. I was like, oh, you don't usually see female characters, period, in Fukumoto works, let alone a female protagonist. But the scanlations didn't get picked up again until the following year in 2020 by Wendy. And then it was the first volume that she had fully completed. And now, chapter 6 of Mamiya, which is actually chapter 5, because the series starts on a one shot, so all the chapters are technically a chapter forward. So yeah, chapter 5. This is always the point I like to tell people to read to see if they'll actually enjoy this series or not, because Fukumoto kind of has a name for himself for being very serious. You know, if you've ever read Kurosawa, it's a very dreary, miserable work in a lot of ways. Gintokin's the same way. Even if it's not like a series that makes you cry, like Buraiden Gai, the first part of Zero, they're all very serious, dramatic works. Even Kaiji, Akagi, there's not a lot of humor in it. And then when you get to this chapter and you see Mamiya call Onigashira a sea monster, as Wendy had translated it. She actually calls him a yokai, umibozu, if you know that one. It's like a sea monster that has really big bulging eyes, just like Onigashira. So that's already very silly. But then you get to the whole proposing to prostitute herself aspect of it, which I thought was very interesting from Fukumoto, because that I remember reading up until that point where I think it was like Mamiya was like, we're not going to do any monetary compensation, because she was explaining that Osamu didn't have any money because he had the loan that he had to take out and everything. And she didn't have any money because she was a teenager herself. So Onigashira's like, how are you going to repay it? And I thought to myself, well, is she gonna sell herself out? But I was like, nah, that's something for like an ecchi manga. That's not something Fukumoto would do. And then you get to the panel of her, that's like the shot of her legs. It's like the shot of her legs when she's walking towards Onigashira. I thought to myself, oh no, he's actually doing it. And then you go through the motions of it. I thought, oh dear God. And so for some reason that really piqued my interest, because I was like, Fukumoto doesn't really do stuff like that. That's very strange of him. And then you had to wait a few more months for the next volume to come out.
Left lingering in the air until then. I see.
Her and Onigashira having all that banter back and forth with each other, doing, you know, I won't do it, you'll do it, I won't do it, you'll do it thing, that back and forth. And I really liked her antics from that point forward. And once I actually turned 18 and I could buy manga for myself, that's when I actually bought the volumes that had been out at that point, which were volumes 3 and 4, and I just decided to go ahead and translate them because I really like translating just as a whole, and I really like this series and Mamiya as a character. So I just wanted to make it more public because I thought that, there's already interest already with this series, with it being a sequel to both Tain and Akagi. And Osamu's in it. I know a lot of people like Osamu. And just people like Fukumoto manga in general. So I just thought people will want to read it. Now, I don't really know how popular of a series this even is, but, just it being available for people, I think was the most important thing for me, especially when it's a series I really love myself.
Yeah, I mean, people can only form their own opinion if they're actually able to consume the media and then think about it. So, just for the sense of that, having it available for everyone to form their own opinions, for us to be able to now gather and discuss it like we are doing today, it's brilliant. So, I already have a few points in mind that I want to think about more closely. But I first want to give Kitsa, I want to give her a chance to talk about if she had a similar experience when first seeing Mamiya appear in the manga.
Yeah, absolutely. It really caught me off guard that Fukumoto was starting another Mahjong series in the universe of Akagi and Ten. First off, I just didn't really expect that to happen. The ending of Akagi's story in Ten feels so definitive. And then finally completing the decades-long endeavor of finishing Akagi's story against Washizu, I was like, okay, that's it. Like, that's kind of our send-off to that universe. And then Mamiya as a character, I feel like is devised in so many ways as like the anti-Akagi, where Akagi is so stoic and reserved. Maybe he just like smirks. And it kind of feels like maybe there's a message here, like Ratatouille. A great legendary gambler can come from anywhere. It's not always the cool, aloof guy. Maybe it's the hyperactive, joking around, completely non-serious teenage girl. So at first I was like, oh, okay, I get it. You invert everything about Akagi. You got to invert the fact that he's a man and have a woman protagonist. But then I feel like even if that was kind of Fukumoto's inspiration, his motivation for doing it, as Mamiya's character just starts to get developed and explored, like it feels like he's having so much fun with her. Like it's unlocked a whole kind of new sense of humor for him, a new way of depicting mahjong gambles, which he's done for thousands of chapters.
Yeah.
So I'm really enjoying it. I'm really happy that I was able to read it.
Cool. I mean, this is. I concur with quite a lot of these things, but I want to delay my personal opinions just a little bit longer because I also want Tomato to have a few words on your first contact with Mamiya. If you remember it.
Yeah, it's been quite a while since it was the first few chapters started being translated. When I first saw that one shot and the few chapters succeeding it, I thought it was very. It was nice and refreshing, like it's a new Fukumoto manga, so of course I'm gonna eat it up voraciously. But yeah, it's obviously very different to Fukumoto's classic, well-known works and his older stuff. In particular, something I noticed was the color scheme. Now, maybe this is something that applies to modern Fukumoto in general, because you also kind of see bright colors in Kaiji. But yeah, the bright colors, which you see on the front cover and on the few colored panels, really bright colors, and not in particular the mahjong tiles. You see everything has like a much more digital, a much more colorful feel. Yeah, like the sleek look of the automatic shuffle mahjong table.
Yeah.
And the tiles have, I think, blue backs, which is like a very, it's not the kind of classic kind of edgy, like black or red, or the common like bamboo back or yellow. It's blue. That's a kind of mild color.
Yeah.
And then you have Mami's. I remember she has like very rosy cheeks when you see her in the colored pictures. That's something I noticed as well. So in some ways very Fukumoto-esque because he applies lots of visual metaphors, and obviously Osamu is there, so it's like a great reference to Akagi, but at the same time very different. But in particular, yeah, the colors and also the time in which it's set. I think, is this the only, or maybe the first canonical Fukumoto work that actually contains smartphones? Because I know smartphones were used in, Otsuki, Tonegawa,
Yeah.
as well,
Yeah,
but those
because
are like spin-offs.
Mamiya
But Mamiya,
Mamiya is supposed to take place in the Reiwa era, which started in 2019. So
yeah.
they would have smartphones then.
So like the first proper Fukumoto work that's actually set in the era of smartphones, which it's very, very modern, very innovative, but at the same time you do see that classic Fukumoto-esque style.
Yeah, it's a really interesting aspect to highlight. I think I'm gonna read the next few chapters that I would be reading with a little bit of a different visual perspective. In general, already we have quite a different inputs. I wouldn't even have thought to focus on the aesthetic of Mamiya, but Tomato, now that you bring it up, I do think it is noteworthy. And I, especially thinking about the Mahjong tiles, I'm getting this modern feeling. I agree with you on that. Maybe I can have a few words also on my first encounter with reading Mamiya. So, first of all, just like each of us, almost Fukumoto maniacs, you could say here, I was like, oh my god, there's another work that continues the universe. I will eat this up. You put it very well. And I found also the actual Mahjong style that they are playing, the Shadow Mahjong, the Yami Mahjong, the rule set. I found it quite intriguing. And especially at the beginning of the gamble, they are using it quite a bit. Then I feel like a little bit in the middle parts, they are it is more focused on the banter between the both of them and not too much on the actual Yami gameplay style. Or it's also a little bit more focused on, the team play and the fact that it's a little bit of like this not quite 1v2 situation, but it's focusing a little bit on the team dynamics. So the actual Mahjong gameplay, it intrigued me. But the point that did intrigue me most, and Mob was the first one to bring it up, that it plays in the Akagi universe, so I will be cycling it back to Mob. I'm gonna put out a controversial statement here. So I don't necessarily agree with this statement, but could it be that Mamiya is only set in the same universe as Ten and Akagi because of fan service, because of advertising purposes? When Mamiya launched, there was a lot of advertising. I remember seeing an M-League player in an outfit of Mamiya playing. There's a very nice clip where she gets like a kokushimuso. Do you think it's a marketing gag, to put it like very bluntly?
I mean, go ahead, Mob.
Yeah, Mob first, then Kitster.
Well, I've thought about that too, because I've noticed, like, as I've read Mamiya and I've translated it, it's kind of a weird word to say, but you do become very intimate with the series. And I don't think that Mamiya is, like, honestly super similar to Akagi. Like, Kitsa mentioned that Akagi is very stoic, whereas Mamiya is like the complete opposite of him. And I mean, in Japanese, they call her literally a high school girl with the heart of Akagi. And I don't know if that's entirely referring to the fact that she has the same gambling spirit, because I mean, Osamu mentions the fact, like at the beginning of the series, he's like, Akagi, I found someone very similar to you. And I don't know if it's just like the undying spirit of not wanting to give up, because Akagi died twice during his game with Washizu, never once gave up his ideal of trying to take down this guy. And I guess you could consider it's the same way with Mamiya, how like she, no matter how low her points get, because I think she gets to what, 1700 points at her lowest during the game with Onigashira, she never gives up, even when Osamu is freaking out in the background. She always like she makes it very clear that she's going to release these idols from contractual slavery, which I think in and of itself is a very interesting goal when you think about it, because like Akagi's goal is almost in a way sort of revenge for Washizu, like giving him his comeuppance for like having killed so many people during his games. Whereas with Mamiya, she's doing almost like an act of benevolence to these idols. She's trying to release them from their contractual debts and just making sure that they don't have to pay back their company presidents at all. Because I mean, I would assume she's been doing this for a while, because we already see she battles against another one in the one shot. She goes against Onigashira, and we see that like when she mentions the fact that Onigashira isn't like a pervert like the other ones, we see like other company presidents that she's supposedly fought against in the past. So I don't really know if it's marketing or not. I don't know if just maybe Fukumoto thought that people wouldn't want to read a work of his that's Mahjong related if it had a female protagonist. He had to have some type of um Akagi tie-in, or maybe he really just wanted to write a series that had Osamu as an older character, because he kind of got left behind with 10 because he doesn't appear at all.
Yeah.
So maybe he wanted a continuation of that character, but he just didn't know really how to do so, because Akagi is dead at the point of Mamiya happening, so it's not like you can go that way. So really the only thing you can do at that point is write in a new character that supposedly has his heart, quote unquote.
Points make a lot of sense. Kitster, what do you think?
I think one thing that Mob brought up just now really kind of sparked something that maybe when Osamu is talking about that Mamiya is similar to Akagi, it's in that she's kind of just doing this because she likes a good fight and she's doing it to help out the idols. And it is implied that, yeah, she just kind of goes around as this Mahjong legend to be brought into situations like this where for her own sense of justice, for her own sense of morals, she fights on behalf of someone. And Akagi too, it seems like he's sort of just interested in a good gamble. He's interested in the thrill ride of a high stakes gamble. And yeah, he's kind of doing it as this revenge on behalf of all the other young gamblers that Washizu took out. But I think we're supposed to realize that both these characters are massively contrasted by every other Mahjong pro one can imagine in the world that they live in real life Japan as well, that are probably a lot more self-interested. They want to win money personally. Why would they bother gambling on behalf of someone else? They don't care about other people's problems. So maybe it's that Mamiya is recognized as being someone who has this sense of benevolence, someone who wants to use their strength on behalf of others. And maybe that's kind of why it ties into the Akagi universe, is like she carries on that will, even though she's such a different person. I also feel like Fukumoto uses these sort of universe connections as a way to kind of indicate like how you ought to prepare to read the series. And it's like Akagi is his pure Mahjong brand. Like if you want to read a series where one chapter is spent on just one discard, where every hand is like an arc, where you're going to have multiple pages explaining why somebody made one choice over another. That's like the Akagi legacy. Like that's, you know, what we're being signaled to expect from Mamiya. So that could be another kind of like generous reading. I think though, yeah, it's hard to ignore that this probably did help with marketing a lot, and that he was certainly probably conscious of that, oh, this is the final successor. We're bringing back this legendary series. But I think it's a mixture. Like I think there's also pretty interesting story aspects that you can infer from that.
Tomato. So thank you for that, Kitster. I am going to follow up in just a bit, but Tomato, for your response, can you also focus a little bit on how you think Mamiya is a contrast to Akagi, but isn't the main question I'm thinking of, isn't Hiroyuki already supposed to be such a contrast to Akagi? Maybe you can talk about this a little bit and how you think about the inclusion of the Akagi universe, let's say, into the story of Mamiya.
Well, yeah, uh, I'm afraid the cynic in me is going to prevail because, yeah, your opinion, which you said that you will say out loud but not necessarily agree with, I'm afraid I do agree with it. I can very much imagine the idea of Mamiya coming from some kind of marketing boardroom, because let's face it, as time has gone on, Fukumoto's work, not just not just the creation of Mamiya, but also the continuation of Kaiji is one thing I'm thinking of in particular. I do, well, in my opinion, I do feel that it's kind of lost its edge. It's not edgy anymore. It's not kind of unique and boundary breaking anymore. It's just kind of, it just goes along and seems to keep on going, even though there's nowhere to go, right? You have like chapters and chapters where nothing happens, chapters and chapters of idle chatter and silly comedic interactions. And I think it's a reflection of Fukumoto kind of, well, I get the impression he's either under a lot of pressure or the opposite. He just like doesn't feel any pressure anymore, and he's just kind of giving the audience what they want. I'll just write whatever I think is going to sell the most, and or maybe he has some kind of marketing, advertising department. You know, maybe the publishers are kind of telling him what to do. So yeah, the cynic in me is going to say, yeah, because let's go back. Let's look back on Fukumoto's work. His most popular works were, you know, Kaiji, Akagi, Gintokin, Buraidengai, Kurosawa. Are there a lot of women? Are there many significant female characters? No. So the idea
we'll get to that, but yeah.
The idea to make a female protagonist, I feel like it came from a marketing department saying, hey, you know, we need to expand our audience as much as we can. Let's get the women interested. Why don't we make a female protagonist? And despite that, I do think it was quite well done. There are like genuinely unique and interesting aspects about Mamiya, but yeah, I do feel like it was just his constant like regression to the lowest common denominator. Like rather than making edgy, literally edgy, like his art style is not something that conforms to the mainstream. Literally edgy works is what was coming out in the 90s and sort of 2000s, and now we're kind of trying to expand to appeal to the widest possible audience. But sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Yeah,
I was like,
do you actually enjoy though? Like,
now I forgot what you asked.
yeah, ignoring where the decision came from. You know, we can speculate on this a whole lot. Probably the only guy who can know that answer is the guy who posted on Reddit that he's the neighbor of Fukumoto, but never followed up on that. Tomato, do you enjoy, like, ignoring where it comes from, do you enjoy the fact that it plays in the Akagi universe or 10 extended universe?
Yes, yeah, Osamu was a nice character, and it's great to see him fleshed out and see that his path is obviously quite different from Akagi and Ten and all those associates who went on to live a like high stakes underground gambling lifestyle. Osamu just took an honest life as a ramen shop owner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's nice. It's nice to tie it into the Akagi universe. And even if someone might say that, oh well, you know, it's really different from the Akagi manga. Well, first of all, Ten and Akagi and the Hero spin-off are quite different from each other, but they're sort of set in the same universe, first of all. And second of all, a lot of time has passed. It's like, you know, Akagi's set in the 50s, and then 10, you have that in the 90s. A lot of time has passed since Akagi has lived and died, so it makes sense that a manga tied into the same universe, but
Yeah.
Very, very far ahead in time-wise, it makes sense that it would be different, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool that it's set in the same universe. Yeah, to answer your question.
I mean, I must agree on the simple point also that I like, when I tell people about Fukumoto, and it's basically like the Fukumoto cinematic universe. It's epic to tell people that all these works are interconnected somehow. It's a very shallow reason, but on a base level, I really enjoyed this way. Thinking about, to give my 2 cents on the discussion on Mamiya as a female protagonist, I do think, once again, who knows where the decision came from. I think it adds a lot to the work. I think, it could be any type of bratty figure that talks back to its opponent, but so much of the worlds that Fukumoto portrays are inherently misogynistic because so many men are everywhere, and that's also how the world of mahjong gambling in general is structured. And it just hits different when there's an actual woman talking back to the characters. And I know I did mention we want to talk about the fact, is Hiroyuki maybe also a contrasting factor or a contrasting character to Akagi? But I first want to ask Mob on like this topic of the banter between Onigashira and Mamiya. The main insult she uses to insult Onigashira is like 70 perf. Is there like what was the process? Is it like a direct word to word translation?
Okay, what she calls him in Japanese is ero nanaju, which so ero is like perverted. So she's like perverted 70-year-old. That's what she's saying essentially. So like when I guess because Wendy's the one who came up with it. So I would assume it's just like a zinger type of thing to make it sound similar to Japanese. Because like ero nanaju doesn't really make any fucking sense in Japanese to begin with. So like it sounds equally as stupid in English, and I personally love it. I think it's funny as hell. I think it's a really good translation. But yeah, she doesn't. It's just that's all she says. That's all she calls him in Japanese.
And on the topic of these nagging nicknames going back and forth, Mamiya is always described as like the conniving fox, I think.
Oh,
is there
yeah,
any deeper meaning to this?
Okay,
Also?
I need to explain that because okay, this shit gave me hell for like 2 years. Because what Onigashira calls her is Megitsune. Now Megitsune is one-to-one vixen in English, as in a female fox. But the thing is, because foxes have a different connotation between English and Japanese. In Japanese, a fox is like, if you know anything about kitsune or just yokai lore, foxes kind of have a connotation of like transforming and taking the form of humans in order to trick other people, whether that be to lure them in to kill them or just play tricks on them in general. So Megitsune has a secondary meaning of a woman who deceives men. And that's exactly what Onigashira is trying to say when she's like, because Mamiya tries to trick her opponents quite a bit. Well, trick, I guess, is kind of a bad word to use. She basically like mind traps them, whether that be like she makes them believe that she's doing a different type of hand, like with her first honitsu that she had. She tricked Onigashira into dealing into her because he was like, I don't remember. I can't remember honestly off the top of my head what it was, but he saw a specific discard from her, and he was like, "There's no way that this is a honitsu," and then he ends up dealing into her honitsu as a result.
Yeah, so I think it was some Sozu discard, maybe.
Yeah, it was a Solzu. So he was like, "There's no way that she would discard this if she's going for Solzu honitsu," so he just deals in exactly with that. And then he starts calling her Megitsune as a result. But the problem is that vixen in English has more of a sexual connotation to it. Like it pretty much means like a salacious lady. And it's also a very antiquated term. Like I don't think I've ever actually heard anyone use it in English. So I really had a hard time thinking of a proper way to put it in English. Cause like if it wasn't tied so much to a visual metaphor, because Fukumoto draws her as a fox
Mm.
every time he says Megitsune, then I probably honestly wouldn't have used any sort of like conniving fox type of thing. Maybe shrewd, because shrewd is an animal, as well as meaning a deplorable woman. But even then, it's like, I don't think there's a good term specifically in English to be like a trickster type of woman, because most terms like that towards women are sort of like calling a woman a bit, which is not really what Onigashira is trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's more like he's the old whippersnapper, and he calls out. He doesn't like necessarily means any sexual context with this nickname, right? Is that what I'm getting? He's literally just calling
Yeah,
out
not at all.
that
Not
she's
at all.
annoying
He's
and
just saying
scheming.
that she's scheming. That's the whole part of it. That she's just being a trickster.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, honestly, that's without like going too deep into the mind of Onigashira, but considering the industry that he finds himself in, maybe it makes sense that he, is a little bit numb and just focuses on or maybe because he's so old and he's so annoyed, he just really hones in on that annoyance part. Kitsa,
Yeah.
what do you think about the back and forth banter? And maybe just so I don't leave that thread hanging, you can also give your 2 cents about Hiroyuki as a contrasting figure to Akagi in comparison to Mamiya. But maybe you can start with your opinion on the banter first.
Oh, I love the banter. I think it's something that's very unique about this and among Fukumoto works. Like, sometimes you'd have this sort of thing where Kurosawa would be arguing with someone and they'd be exchanging barbs like this, but generally in these Fukumoto works, it's like usually one character is very much on the back foot. They're just kind of getting browbeaten by someone's commentary. Whereas I think they did a good job making them, true rivals. And even though Mamiya certainly has the upper hand in cleverness, and she has this sort of like youthful vitality that you can tell is just eating them up inside, they still kind of rattle each other. There's sequences where Mamiya gets freaked out because she realizes he's been able to expose her hand. There's sequences where she feels so unlucky that she's betrayed by the whole, that all of the good draws are going to him. And I just really like that dynamic. I feel like Fukumoto hasn't really played with that so much of characters that are really trying to just get in under each other's skin. And there's no kind of clear intellectual superior. So I really enjoy that. I think that was something that really made it stand out from other Mahjong action. When the sequences are going to be long looks at people's hands no matter what.
Yeah.
That's kind of the action. What can you change up? Well, the commentary. You can change up the imagery that they describe each other with, what kind of things they imagine, and what kind of insults they throw around. So yeah, lots of fun.
So of course, Fukumoto is not a complete stranger to depicting less, even though it is a serious environment that they play in. He is not complete. It's not a complete foreign concept to have, a little bit more playful mahjong situations. If I think of the Harukaze guest house, Penchan. But I also like those really. So, but sorry for interrupting you there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in some sense, he's sort of returning to his roots with Mamiya. Like we talked earlier about, like, is Fukumoto works less edgy now? And yeah, like comparing to betting your own blood and gambling until you're passed out on the table. The stakes in Mamiya are relatively lower. Like, it's still obviously a big deal getting these idols out of their contract, but it's not literally life and death. And yeah, it kind of harkens back to his early Mahjong series where it's like, it's a game. Like, they're on some level having fun. Like, they're vying for superiority, but they're not trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
I even feel like a glimmer of sort of mutual respect, that they're definitely trying to annoy each other and insult each other. But deep down, it's like Mamiya realizes that he's a formidable opponent, and he realizes more and more as the game goes on that, like, yeah, this girl's really smart and clever and keeps getting the upper hand on me.
I feel like Tomato has a response brewing. Kids, let's just hear your opinion on the comparison to Hiroyuki first, because I want to hear your guys' opinion on this also.
I
Yeah,
think
that's
it's funny
Hmm?
when you guys brought up Hiroyuki. I actually had totally forgotten about Hiroyuki.
Oh
I read the whole
man,
thing.
my
I
boy.
enjoyed it. I thought it was fun, but I think maybe just because it's not Fukumoto's art, I kind of lodged it in my head as just some other Mahjong series and
Oh
not part
damn.
of the Akagi universe, the Fukumoto universe, whatever. But I think it's like a much more kind of straightforward. This is a man who's aspiring to be a gambler on the level of Akagi. He keeps learning, oh, I have to make miracles happen. I have to transcend possibility like Akagi did. I have to remain cool and collected and not buckle under this pressure, blah, blah, blah. So he's very much like walking in Akagi's footsteps. Whereas Mamiya, she's like in her own lane. Like she's managed to
True.
become a gambling legend and become this sort of like benevolent hero without knowing who Akagi is. Like in the last chapter, she's like, "Oh, you're always going on about this guy. Like, what's his deal?" Like, it's very it's two like very different takes on what it means to kind of follow in someone's footsteps. I guess what it means to like
Fair.
inherit somebody's title, which I think is cool.
Yeah, honestly, makes Hiroyuki seem kind of delusional when we talk about him like that. But
Yeah, nice try, buddy.
Tomato, let's hear your rebuttal to the last few points.
Well, your question is about the comparison of Akagi and Hiro.
And
I would
yeah,
say
let's start with that.
Akagi and Hiro are in some ways opposites and in some ways very similar. And I'd say the same thing about Mamiya and Akagi, but they are similar and opposite in some different ways. So Hiroyuki is different from Akagi in that he's inexperienced. He's different from Akagi in that he thinks about things very logically. You know, he's thinking about, oh, what tile is most likely to come out. Oh, let me look at little details like, oh, this guy is turning his tiles around, so that it must be a Mansu
Yeah.
tile.
Mm.
Oh, Harada touched his tiles when he's able to chi or pawn, so like that's a tell. He noticed that, right? Very, very
Mm.
logical, very hyper logical way of looking at it, things. Whereas Akagi is the opposite of that. Akagi doesn't fixate upon the details. At least it doesn't seem that way because we don't usually see his thought process, what's going on inside his mind.
Yeah.
But he seems like someone who just knows what's going to happen. He knows how events are going to unfold. He has an innate feeling of flow that he follows, and he manages to play. His play style is informed by that. Uh, Going to Akagi and Mamiya now, I think they're obviously different in that Akagi is very taciturn, a man of few words. You know, doesn't really have a lot to say. Doesn't really. Oh, come to think of it, actually, he does taunt his opponents sometimes. Like he, he even at the beginning with Yagi, he's like, yeah, sure, you can cut off a finger every time I lose, but
Yeah.
something applies to you. You don't look like you have a lot of money. Yeah, let's cut off one of your fingers. And then
Mm.
he calls him something rude when he falls for his you know, the fake Khan where he switches out the Forso. He's like, you're a
Yeah.
retard, young Khan.
Yeah. He was, especially when he was young, he was more cocky.
Yeah,
Mm.
I thought it was funny that he like said a rude word, but also calls him Yagi-san with the honorific. And, you know, like, could you go fuck yourself, please, sir? What was I gonna say? So yeah, they're similar in that Akagi likes to taunt and mentally stress out his opponent, just like Mamiya likes to do with on the Onigashira, for example. But I think they do it in very different ways. Akagi
Mm.
tends to say just a few words here and there, and he kind of makes like big insulting gestures, like when he sent Osamu to play before him, he's like saying, "Oh, this guy is nothing. It's not a big deal. Let this amateur go in and play a few rounds before I go. I don't really feel like it. Yeah, I'm not feeling it yet. The real match will start later. I don't really care. And what else? Like when he gets up from the table before the match is over. He says,
Oh yeah.
"I know for sure that Urabe is going to deal into this hand. Ishikawa-san, please take my place. All you have to do is say it on. I'm going to head out. See ya." These very bold, symbolic gestures of disrespect. Whereas, so Mamiya also kind of mentally stresses out her opponents, but I would say she goes about it in a very different way. Just like lots of kind of childish, shrill, annoying things like, no, yeah, you will. No, I won't. No, yeah, you will. No, you won't. It's more childish. It's more puerile, It's the kind of thing you'd see in primary school or elementary school.
But Onigashira even calls her out that he thinks it is psychological manipulation on her part, and I think it's very much intentional.
Yeah, so I don't think anything comes to my mind immediately. Just I think, yeah, Akagi and Hiro and Akagi and Mamiya, they are similar and opposite, but in different ways.
Yeah, cool. Honestly, quite interesting insights, and this ended up being more interesting than expected to compare the two. Tomato, you still need to reply to the idea that Kitsa and I came up with, that it does feel like Fukumoto is going a little back to his early roots with the type of mahjong banter that he is covering. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great point that Kitsa mentioned. The early works, because some people, think that Kaiji and Gintokin and stuff like that is Fukumoto's early work. It's actually more like his kind of in the middle of his career. His real early work was a bunch of one-shots, which often were comedic in nature, and sometimes they would involve mahjong and gambling. But yeah, like stuff like Harukaze, Penchan, Atsuize Tenma, various one-shots, which I forget the name of, but is he going back to that? I don't think so. I can see why you would say that, because it's going back to a more lighthearted, comedic kind of style.
Yeah.
But I think the comedy has a different vibe. In certain ways, it's kind of a bit less wholesome, in my opinion. Back in the his early works, it seemed like there would be a lot of moments where the story would end with some kind of wholesome feeling, like something happens and we have a few laughs, and some people get angry and shout or start crying or get angry, but at the end of the day you feel like people have been brought together, or something kind of emotionally moving has happened that gives you more sympathy for some character which seemed mean before. Whereas I get the impression the comedy nowadays, and when I say this, I'm talking about Mamiya, the kind of bickering. Yeah, I wouldn't call it banter. I would call it bickering between Onigashira and Mamiya. Sorry. But yeah, the bickering, and the kind of stuff that happens in Kaiji Part 6, and the comedy spin-offs, which aren't technically written by Fukumoto, but they're supervised, but whatever. The comedy, no, actually forget what I said about the spin-offs. No, just Fukumoto stuff.
Yeah.
Mami and recent Kaiji Part 6. I get the impression that it's not as kind of wholesome, and kind of it has like a moving, family-oriented message for all ages. Come together, look at the light side of life. It's more just like, how do I say this? Comedy, just pure, just jokes, jokes for the sake of joke.
I get what you mean. It is like,
being that too harsh, but it doesn't feel like there's some kind of deeper, kind of warm message behind it. That's the impression that I get when I read his modern comedy, as opposed to his way older stuff. That's just my opinion.
It's like family is also a lot less of a topic than it used to be. 10 starts off with 10 and his two and his two wives. But before we go actually to the portrayal of other women, I want to give Mob the stage to have any further thoughts on Mamiya overall, either replying to some of our ideas we brought up or some closing statements that you want to get out to everyone who is enjoying reading Mamiya.
Well, with Mamiya, I will say I do actually find it very interesting. I guess you could call it like the male and female differences. Like there's a lot of instances where for example, that one panel where Onigashi does like, if you were a man, I would have punched you in the face a long time ago. Stuff like that. And the whole thing with like chivalry was really interesting, how he was talking about how his side is more focused on chivalry, which in Japanese is called danki, and the dan in that is uses the character for man. And I remember in particular there's a page that actually has like one speech bubble where he's talking about danki, and then the other one, or nanki, and then the other one's talking about it has like megitsune, it's like megitsune mahjong. And I just thought that like having those two really close to each other in a sentence was very interesting from a visual perspective. Like you have the male spirit versus a trickster sort of woman, like comparing the two, how the chivalry aspect is the more like not logical, but the more truthful approach to it, whereas the more like actual logical version is the trickster version, the feminine version.
Yeah.
And also, too, what's interesting about Mamiya is she actually uses, I don't know how many people know this, she actually uses ore, which is the masculine I, to talk about herself. She doesn't use watashi, which is more of the feminine version of I. She uses a more masculine version just in general to talk. It's very interesting. I don't know if like the implication with that is that she, like, that's part of her having Akagi spirit. She literally has a man's spirit inside of her. That's why she talks the way she does. Or, and I think this might be the more accurate version, is that's a very disrespectful way to talk more than anything else. It's not only a masculine way to talk, but it's very informal and just masculine and just not very feminine in general. So I don't know if that's to add to the fact that she's just like a very disrespectful person in general, or just to like kind of differentiate her or even put her on the same level as the other characters, because pretty much all the other characters, with the exception of the idols, talk the same way that Mamiya does, in this very masculine sort of like
Coarse
like a
way.
masculine prowess, coarse type of way. And had another thought in mind that I forgot.
Yeah, it's all right. We will have a little moment at the very end also to put on any more thoughts that you may have. So when it comes back, feel free to share your insights with us. So far, already so good. I am thinking quite differently about Mamiya than I did at the beginning, but like I teased and mentioned, we also want to discuss a few of the other women in Fukumoto's work. Prior to the recording, Tomato said there are quite a few. I have a small list here of what I remember personally, and I am thinking that we will be doing a little bit of a lightning round where I will be asking some of you if you know them and if you have a few words on them until we are through with this list. It's about 7 different ones. And Tomato, I think you have maybe some ideas about these characters that I want to start with. The sisters.
No, I was laughing because it's like catch out the fake Fukumoto fan. We're doing a lightning round. You know this female Fukumoto character. If you don't call yourself a real fan.
It is a little bit goes into this challenging aspect. So, Tomato, the sisters from the Harukaze guest house.
Yeah. Well, that's like quite a short story, and
yeah, you were talking about family.
Yeah, I wish, it would be nice if that whole manga was translated, because it was nice to see them introduced. The two sisters, or were there three sisters? I remember there was one who's like very, moody teenager. She like wants to be a rock star.
Yeah.
And there's one that's like a completely little girl. And is there one more?
I think one more
Oh, you
that
said two
gets
sisters.
cheated with the Chitoi Daisangen trick.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, like
The one who's
older.
looking for marriage, and she
Yeah.
gets a little bit smitten with those male guests.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it would be nice if they were explored more. I feel like as we, yeah, I don't have much to say because there's only 3 chapters translated. But it would be nice to like see them grow.
Yeah.
Not just the girls, but like the whole family,
Yeah.
and see them get closer and maybe grow up and learn a few lessons along the way. Yeah, I don't have much to say because it's not translated. Let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. Although, with the resurgence of the Harukaze guest house in Nikaido, who knows? Maybe people will think more about it.
That was initially that Fukumoto made.
Kitsta, oh yeah?
Like there, what was the manga where they're staying at the Hotel Akagi? Or was it Akagi Restaurant where Kaiji go to?
Yeah, I vaguely remember it.
Anyway, I don't
At the end
know.
of Akagi, Washizu ends up somewhere, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
He goes.
Such a disrespectful ending. But let's stick with women and kids. I'm gonna give you a real easy one. Tell us your opinion about Kaiji's mom.
Kaiji's mom. Now, I listened to the episode where you guys ranked Kaiji arcs. Both of you were a little down on part 6, so I'll start off by saying that's actually, I think, my favorite Kaiji part now. I'm loving part 6.
Oh.
I'm loving every wacky situation, all the comedic parts. I love how strange and goofy it gets. And I think Kaiji's mom is like a great example of the very unique direction this whole part has gone in. I like that she's kind of like stronger than Kaiji in some ways. That Kaiji, who is, so smart and so opportunistic and is so quick to formulate plans, his mom is just such an agent of like chaos and emotion and complete unpredictability that this middle-aged woman is kind of like defeating Kaiji at the whole kind of planning and strategizing game. Like Kaiji just can't keep up with her behavior. So I like that. I thought that was an interesting kind of like, he's in a lot of danger. They're doing the whole bulwark. He knows that they're surrounded, but the biggest challenge is his mom.
It's actually an interesting way to put it. Yeah, it is brought up a little bit as this big challenge for Kaiji, but I will have to reread a lot of Kaiji Part 6 once it picks up again. But just let me take a second to tell you, it's like quite an advanced taste to have Part 6 as the #1 spot. That's all I can say.
It's up there at least.
Yeah.
I love Part 2 a lot as well, Like, they all have their appeal to me, but I don't know. Yeah, Part 6, it's something special.
All right. Let's actually stick with female characters in Kaiji. Mob, tell us what you think about Mikoko.
I knew you were going to mention her the moment that you mentioned Kaiji. I have, like, nothing really to say about her because...
This was a good discussion.
She just never stuck out to me really as a super interesting character, even though she's pretty prominent in the first, because mostly her dad that I always remember, Sakazaki, just being crazy and Kaiji, him being like, Kaiji's a degenerate, gonna ruin his daughter. But yeah, I don't really have much to say about her.
I mean, throwing the ball to Kitsta and Tomato also, do you think Mikoko is even supposed to be she's not really given the chance to be a character on her own. Is she supposed to be a character on her own?
He's just kind of like a human punishment.
Yeah, exactly.
He's like a personification of the Tei torture apparatuses. It's another like bad end that Kaiji has to sneak away from.
I did not see it that way.
Oh.
I see Mikoko as a gem in the rough, a very underrated, underappreciated gem of a person. She's very forgiving and nice to Kaiji. She makes him sandwiches. She wants to spend time with him and gives him money so he can have his fun at the pachinko. She's a very nice woman and maybe not the most physically attractive, but I think part of Kaiji's development, his development in the future as a character, hopefully we will see him mature because he's very immature in a lot of ways. And so hopefully will eventually mature and realize, wow, Mikoko is a great woman for me, and I need to treat her right and step up. And hopefully that will happen as Kaiji kind of grows out of his being addicted, degenerate ways and becomes a real man. Maybe he'll cut his hair and start working earnestly like the granny wants him to.
Honestly, that would kind of be a Giga Chat development for Kaiji, not gonna lie. Because, like, Mikoko treats him really nicely, despite him, being the epitome of human trash.
And despite her father giving such disapproval, giving her such disapproval about the fact.
Yeah. I mean, maybe Sakazaki has some time also to think about, to reflect on Kaiji actually showing up at his door again and, repaying him. Maybe he gets some time to reflect as well. I remember we had some harsh opinions on him while we were discussing our opinions on the different Kaiji parts also. He maybe still has some time to develop. But we want to see the main focus on Kaiji, of course. All right. Let's move on to the next person in the flash round. And Tomato, I'm going to throw you a real curveball here. I'm banking on you being the absolute exquisite Fukumoto enjoyer. Because I actually don't remember if she was. I think she is featured in part 2. The weird lady that Zero has to gamble against with the shopping cart gimmick.
Yeah, I remember her.
Mm-hmm.
Does Tomato also remember her?
I don't know, man. Can I pass the ball to someone else for this one?
Yeah, Kitsari reacted very strongly. You remember her?
Well, I hadn't thought about her probably since I read Zero Part 2. I don't know if Mob has more of a definite opinion, but I remember she ends up being kind of like in the party, right? Like she ends up being their ally and tags along for the next adventures. And I remember thinking that was very surprising because she's very much set up to be kind of like a scary, imposing, almost inhuman figure. And then,
you know what they say, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Indeed, yeah. So I remember that catching me off guard. I don't remember the gamble itself too well.
Yeah, it was a bit weird.
I don't know, go ahead, Mob.
I was just gonna say she's actually one of the characters I remember most from Zero Part 2. That whole shopping gamble in general, along with the golf arc, are really the only two things I remember from Zero Part 2.
Not the scavenger hunt.
I mean, I blacked that out of my head because it was really boring, honestly, when I read it.
That's a long arc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually completely forgot about the part that she does join the party. I was thinking maybe, she's at first shown as, very grotesque depiction, honestly, because she is a villain. Also, she puts the gamble completely in her favor. She allows her to buy all these benefits for the gamble to her, and she's more shown like as a sort of boss character, monster even. But then she ends up being humanized, maybe even humbled by Zero, and then joining the party. So yeah, this part I blanked out, but it's quite interesting. Maybe I should reread Zero Part 2. It's been like 6 years for me since I read it. Okay, then we have just a few smaller ones before we get back to the big guns, and I think you guys already know who I'm building this up to a little bit. But I think Kitsuta, you read Shin Kurosawa. Are you up to date?
I'm up to date with the scanlation.
Yeah. So,
I don't know what happens past that.
Do you have an opinion on the daughters of the Aikido dojo master?
Well, I think they fit a kind of common Fukumoto archetype, which is like the pretty girl that everyone is sort of flustered by. I think it's notable, and maybe I'm overlooking some early counterexamples, but like nobody ever in Fukumoto works like get the girl, right? Like, sometimes Kurosawa is motivated to impress the girl.
I mean, Morita manages to get the girl to like him, but I guess he doesn't have feelings for the girl, so he kind of gets the girl, but he doesn't want the girl.
Yeah, it's not your traditional ending of windswept kiss or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think she kind of fits that role. What I like about her is that she kind of like it's not that she's toying with Kurosawa per se, but she seems to like genuinely enjoy his company and find him like amusing in the way that probably a lot of readers find him amusing and somewhat endearing. But I like that he just consistently can kind of be friends with her up till a point, be close with her up till a point, even be kind of like sincere and emotional with her up until a point. And then she just goes like, nope, you hit the wall.
Yeah.
I'm actually grossed out by you. Why did you think you could take that one step further? And I like that. I like that kind of dynamic being highlighted, because it's like, it shouldn't be an all or nothing thing, you know, like she should be able to enjoy his company without him taking that as an invitation for a romantic escapade or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I like that kind of depiction. I'm hoping that she'll continue being a part of the story as we head into this like gigantic final saga.
And I'm actually going to put a pin on that thought, because that will be an interesting point to discuss later on when we want to compare the women in Fukumoto's work with other more traditional shonen and seinen characters, and actually see, you know, how the dynamic with the men and the women is portrayed. So I'll keep that in mind. And let's just wrap up the, let's say, minor female characters. Tomato, do you like the fact that Ten has 2 wives?
I don't know what to think about that. That is very unusual, obviously, to have such a, you know, strong bond where, you know, you share everything. And traditionally, you know, when you have a wife, you swear off other women. You don't see other women. You don't have them in your life. But Ten somehow has 2 wives. Honestly, very perplexing. I have no idea how that dynamic works. You could say it's very forward thinking, very progressive. You know, nowadays you see polyamory being a thing. So maybe Fukumoto was actually very ahead of his time.
I mean, I genuinely, the more I think about it, the more I like it. I never feel like, you know, that Ten is just, you know, portrayed as like, oh, he's such a player and that's what's going on. But it's like really portrayed as a really respectful relationship. And I mean, also speaking outside, let's say, of the modern Western polygamy, it has always been something that has been around. Let's say, for example, in the Middle East, one of my landlords, he was from Yemen, he had 2 wives, and you know, it's not something, let's say, in the classic Western world we come across very often, but it was very surprising for me to see it depicted like this. But I have no negative feelings to the way that it is portrayed. Then we have one more minor character, in case anyone here remembers her. I forgot her name, unfortunately. The evil hench, and it's not directly Fukumoto, it is from the Hero manga, like the female hench lady, like in the fancy Chinese dress. Do you remember her?
Oh,
like she's responsible for showing like the big scroll of like the agreement, you know, for the casino building.
And she turns out to be the main villain's daughter too.
I think so, right?
I believe.
Yeah.
I don't think she was much of a character. I mean, what did she actually do? She just kind of, she was an announcer. She was basically one of those.
Yeah.
She was the equivalent of a black suit. She just like stood there and said some stuff, but didn't really. She was just doing her job, basically, like announcing the rules, saying the rules. I don't think she said much more. She might have answered some questions, but beyond that, she wasn't really explored as a character, I don't think.
It is like in every section of the, let's say, multi-stage game that they were on, it was always starting with her, and maybe this is like the insane ramblings of a very insane man, but I, for some reason, think of the golden statue on the Espor when I think of her, because it's always like a centerpiece that your attention is brought to again in between gambles. But also maybe I'm just thinking of it because the Espor is a ship, and and I'm only now putting two and two together that Hero also plays on the giant ship with a giant golden dragon statue in the center. Kitsa, you have any closing remarks on this before we move on to the heavy hitter characters, how I call them? Any women that I may forgot that do not appear in Nikaido?
Let me think. I feel like before we did this episode, I was like mentally cataloging ones that I could remember. I think there was in the first part of Kurosawa, there is the adorable old lady Okane,
and the old lady in Kaiji Part 6,
who's there's a couple old ladies, who kind of fit a different archetype. Either they're busybodies and they're loud and antagonistic, or they're like the nice old lady at the end of Kurosawa Part 1. That's just kind of a poor soul that's been downtrodden by the earth. It's kind of interesting. Like, if you just sort of start sorting these characters into what sort of roles they play, there are some consistencies in who Fukumoto decides to turn into a woman. I don't know, that's a strange phrasing, but you know what I mean. To write the character as a woman character versus kind of the default of another man character.
Mob, do you have some more thoughts on like the age of the women that are portrayed? Because for some reason, also when making this list, I didn't even think of the granny from Part 6, which is one of the most powerful Fukumoto universe characters. No diff.
Actually, in terms of ages, he always has like, it seems like he has the really older characters like the grannies, and then the other ones are like either really young adults or teenagers. Because the two that I was thinking of was Muta from Route 39. I don't know how many people have read Route 39, but it's it's the 16-year-old that the protagonist runs away with. And the only reason to actually read Route 39, because I find the protagonist really annoying to read, and because she actually is very similar to Mamiya. She's very bubbly, super energetic type of character, really acts like a teenager. And then the other one I was thinking of was Tanaka from Gintokin, the nurse, during the Kamui arc, during the penultimate arc.
I was thinking of her.
I forgot about her.
Her first name is Sayuri, right? Or am I getting confused?
I think it's Sayuri, yeah. It's something like that. She's the one that's with Morita when they're scavenging through the levels there. I remember being really annoyed by her character. I don't know why when I first read it. I actually reread the Kamui arc just recently, and my thoughts have kind of changed because she's just kind of like a character that's there mostly, like she's just kind of there to tag along with Morita. Because, like, her pager goes off when they're on the floor for the first time, and that, like, alerts everyone around here, and Morita figures out that she's kind of like a, what would you call, like, a spy character, and then she gets shot in the knee later on, so there's that, but...
I have more to say than that about her. I was waiting for Wizomi to ask about Sayuri.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So... what's notable about Sayuri is that she, unlike the previously introduced women in Gintokin, just the pretty girls working at the cafe, or like one of them works at the cafe and she has a bunch of friends, No, they don't. They're as characters, they don't really develop that much. They're like kind of damsels in distress. Like, oh no, we tried to gamble against these rich guys, but we lost because they cheated. Whatever will we do? Will some big strong man come and save us? So there was that. But the contrast with Sayuri or Tanaka or the nurse is that she's actually a co-conspirator. She's like a partner in crime, which Gin. I keep saying Gin instead of Morita because the manga is called Gin Tokin, so I think Gin. No, the co-conspirator, a partner in crime that Morita will be working with in order to carry out the schemes of Gin. So why do I say that? Yeah, because you actually see her in an action role. I thought that was significant. She's actually part of the plan. And one thing that's also significant, in my opinion, is, well, the fact that she's a woman and also she's drawn in a very pretty way compared to the kind of hard edges. I don't think Gintokin was that edgy compared to like Kaiji, where the faces are literally just about triangular, the faces and the noses, right?
Yeah.
Gintokin was slightly less edgy in that regard, but still, the men, the men were kind of like a bit more rough. And come to think of it, Ginji was very, very edgy. He had like, a face which was almost triangular and a nose which was very pronounced. She, on the other hand, had very soft features, very, very delicate, very pretty. I think in the first panel where she gets seen, I get the impression, maybe this is just me, but I get the impression that Morita was kind of taken aback by her beauty. She's like, wow, I thought it would be like some old bitch.
Fukumoto has
And I
cooked
think
today.
because he wasn't interested in those other pretty girls, right? Whichever one of them fancied him, he was like, nah, I don't like you in that way. So maybe what Morita was after was someone who's a little bit more his equal, a little bit more of a like intellectual powerhouse, or someone who's, okay, I don't know about powerhouse, but someone who's like a bit more brave, a bit more bold, a bit more smart, someone, maybe a partner in crime that he can like
Yeah.
get involved with those kinds of activities with, rather than just a like naive coffee shop girl that is a victim and needs to be protected. Um, so I got the impression that maybe Morita saw her, thought she was beautiful, and also the fact that they're going to be working together is going to bring them closer, and maybe there would be some kind of romantic angle there. That's what I thought would happen. And the fact that she's pretty kind of doesn't make you suspect that she is going to be, and also that combined with the previous portrayal of similar pretty girls, you don't, which are drawn in with very soft features. You don't think that she's going to be so treacherous and actually be acting as a spy. You think she's just going to like do something simple and help the guy escape, and it just ends there. You think her involvement would be a bit more simple, but no, she actually gets revealed to be a spy, like Mob said. So
Yeah.
I thought the fact that she is a woman and was drawn with such soft, delicate features, looking kind of innocent and cute, made her all the more made that development all the more surprising.
Yeah. Quite the interesting and yeah, also like deeply portrayed. Like we see more of her than one would actually expect. So thank you for bringing that up, Tomato. I mean, we could go on forever with, let's say, also a lot more minor female characters. There's, the family of Kazuya, his mom, mother Sophie. Then also like the damsel in distress that Kazuya kills and writes the romance novel about. Master Koinosuke's mother, the headmistress of the Aikido dojo. Is there anyone, Tomato, who you still have strong feelings about, or should we move on to Nikaido?
No, I was really hoping you would mention Sayuri the nurse.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get that out of me. Please feel free to move on with whatever you wish to say next.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I would love to talk a lot about Koinosuke's mom, I think we have to learn still a lot yet about her. It falls also into the more old lady type, even though she's actually demonstrated to have a lot of power. You know, she brought the dojo to where it is, and I'm quite excited to see what appearances she will have if Kurosawa will actually be talking directly with her. But this is all speculation. Let's talk about what we know already about female characters and mob. I know we ask you to limit yourself to the English scan-lated part, but let's talk about Kafka-chan. What do you think about her? And also maybe
Kasumi.
the other idols that are shown in Nikaido.
Oh, I love Kasumi. She's great. She's very similarly written to Mamiya. I've noticed a pattern with Fukumoto in writing women. I think Tanaka is also kind of an outlier in that I don't know if it's just because she's like one of the first prominent female characters he wrote, but she's a very serious character. I mean, there wasn't really much time to goof off in Gintokin. If you've ever read it, it's a very, very dreary manga, especially during the Kamui arc. But with a much more lighthearted series like Nikaido, it kind of lets you have more goofiness with a character, like with Kasumi or Kafka, as her idol name is. But she just, she when she first meets Nikaido, she makes like all of these little puns with him to like try to get to know him better, and then very similarly, her path as an idol is sort of like Nikaido's, where she's failing to really take off. I forget how many years she had been an idol for. Was it like 3 or 4? And she had never really made a big break
Yes,
in
definitely a
her
significant amount
career.
of time for an idol.
Yeah, a very long time. And she concert, like when Nikaido goes to her concert, she's always in the back, and then they have that one section where she's like dressed up as a caterpillar and they all just throw apples at her. No one wants to come to her stand to get the cheek kiss or the cheek picture. I forget exactly what it was, but that and then when she hangs out with Nikaido at the park and they have their very colorful banter with each other. Um but yeah, I think she's a very interesting character. It's kind of interesting how she's like a literal plot device character in that like she's a stage in Nikaido's life where because he's so obsessed with his goal and trying to become a pro golfer, he doesn't give up his dream to be with Kasumi. He just keeps going on, and then later on, he finds out that she gets married, and he's devastated from that because it's kind of like he could have stopped. He could have seen the light, could have actually stopped what he was doing, but he lost something that was very important to him, which can be a person, doesn't necessarily have to be like a goal, And I think that's a very good way of using like a character as a plot device of like that's something that can happen in real life, if you get too focused on what you're doing and you don't make time for your personal relationships, oftentimes people will just move on and go on with their daily life, and then later on you find out, hey, this person got married, hey, this person's really successful and I could have been a part of their life, but because I was too stubborn, I was too pig-headed, and I didn't go along with them, I'm not a part of their life anymore. I missed out on something big.
Yeah.
Well said.
Well, very, very well said. It is like I really adore her as a character, and it was surprising and shocking to me to find out that Fukumoto can write in a way where I can get attached to a character so quickly in such a short amount of time and immediately feel very strong feelings for their interactions. And from my conversations with other people who have read Nikaido, it is not just me who has felt this way. Kitster, what are your thoughts on Kasumi?
I'm right there with you. I was so moved by her so quickly. I think the fact that she's called Kafka in her idol troupe of literary idols just kind of sealed her fate from the start. Kafka, a writer of many absurd tragedies where characters fall into deeper and deeper misfortune, often through no fault of their own. I think it's telling that, like Mob said, she's somewhat of like a plot device as character, of someone that represents some kind of hope for Nikaido, some better future that isn't just him repeatedly failing the pro exam over and over again, some other path he could take. And I love that the character they wrote for that position, Fukumoto made her a failure as well, made her someone that could truly relate to Nikaido. That she's not a super successful idol, she's not famous, she's not, you know, commanding tons of attention every time she turns her head, but somebody that can really relate to Nikaido, that's going through kind of her own version of his experiences. And I think it really emphasizes Nikaido's tragic flaw that he can't see that she's already there for him, that even if they're not going to have like a romantic relationship, that he's already found someone who's sympathetic, who truly understands and loves him in her own way.
Yeah.
He can only imagine, if I become a pro golfer, if I, you know, win the PGA, whatever, then I can go with Kasumi. Then I'll be a suitable partner for her and we can live happily. And I think that just really summarizes like why this guy is in hell, why he can never improve, why he can never seize any opportunities for happiness that end up in his lap.
Yeah.
He can only envision himself as happy once he becomes a pro golfer. He's got it all backwards.
I mean, it's just like Mob said, she's like a plot device character, also in the mind of Nikaido, actually, you know. He thinks, oh, I'm gonna succeed, then I get the girl of my dreams, then I can be happy. I've never thought about it this way, and it will be interesting when we talk about comparison to other character dynamics in works from other mangaka, but yeah, you have a good point there. Tomato, what do you think about Kasumi?
Kasumi, she's drawn in a very cute way, so very pleasant to look at, especially when she makes her pouty faces. Yeah, I honestly, Mob and Keats covered it very well. They made such good insights. I don't think I can say anything more.
So what, Tomato? Let me ask you then controversially. Why do you seem to not like Onigashida's banter with Mamiya, but you seem to be okay with the banter between? I mean, you didn't even call it banter between Mamiya and Onigashida, but like bickering. But do you see it on the same level as Nikaido talking to Kasumi?
Well, I think that's apples and oranges, my friend.
Oh, all right. Or tomatoes and oranges.
One of them is a gamble where we're supposed to be seeing someone's fate settled through a game of mahjong. There should be a level of decorum. It should be taken seriously. And if there's going to be taunting and aggression, then, well, I just feel like it should be a bit more like Akagi, you know? That's more my style. Whereas, not this kind of like type of thing. Whereas Kasumi and Nikaido, well, they're not like gambling against each other. They're just like two people who are, you know, they become friends and they spend time together. So it's natural that they would be a bit silly and goofy with each other. Tease each other a bit, be a bit silly. I think that's perfectly normal and appropriate and makes sense. Like I don't find it strange. Whereas I find the kind of a serious gamble and Mamiya acting like a annoying person seems weird.
All right. Sorry for getting at you a little bit with that. I just thought it would be a nice way to connect our previous discussion with it. One thing I am thinking about, and maybe Mob, keep your lips sealed because we want to limit it to the translated part. So this is just theory crafting from my side. If it is completely irrelevant to what's going on with the Raws, feel free to join in on the discussion. the most recent translated chapters at the point of this recording cover Nikaido thinking about how he can use this new power that he has obtained. You know, the Nikaido. Do you want to try again? And at first he reminisces about that it is only, you know, like 5 to 7 seconds that he can go back in time. But my very first thought when reading this was, what if he like that we don't know yet at this point the real limitations of like the frequency with how he can use it, for example. What if he snaps completely and, you know, he uses it over and over and over and over again to travel back so much that he can actually redo some interactions with Kasumi? Is this something that we do not need to worry about and my mind is just thinking up insane things? What do you guys think?
I don't know. I feel like whatever we say is just going to become outdated as soon as the roars do get translated.
Of course. So let's talk about this right, and it's because we're taking the snapshot also of how we are reading into Kasumi right now.
Yeah, I remember, I think in episode 2, we started discussing Nikaido, and we released it like sometime after, or was it episode 3? I forgot. But we released it, we had the discussion, and then the actual release of the episode came sometime after it was recorded. And so in that time, some developments in Nikaido had occurred.
We were talking about it being peak, and it got more peak. So I think that's all right.
We were still talking about how Nikaido is interesting in that, you know, things are developing very slowly. We see Nikaido go through his life aging as the years go by, and lots of different things going on. And we were talking about that when we hadn't even seen the supernatural element, Nikaido, the little character. So we missed a completely fundamental theme of the manga simply because it hadn't been translated yet. It was still setting the scene for what was to come. So I just think like, we're gonna like, whatever we say is gonna become very outdated. But it might be fun to explore theory at the time, whatever you wish.
Yeah, I mean, now that you brought up the disclaimer, you know, the audience, they know what's up. I just want maybe Kitsa give a few words. Is my theory completely insane? That's the only thing I want to know.
I think it's telling that, and maybe I'm missing, like I forgot, but I don't think Nikaido really even considers Kasumi right off the bat when he realizes he has this power. He focuses more on like gambling. I don't know if the idea of like chaining it together occurs to him. Because I think in his mind, he still kind of like feels, as long as I succeed as a golfer and I become rich and famous, all of these other problems will somehow just like take care of themselves. And I know he's like upset about losing Kasumi. That was like a real low point of his life. But I think in another sense, like he doesn't really have the maturity to recognize how special Kasumi really was to him. And instead, I think he very quickly transitioned into thinking, oh, well, I'll get some other like pretty woman. I'll find myself a wife once I'm successful. Sure. This is a little tangent, but do you guys want to hear what I think will happen? I think I mentioned this in manga.
Yeah, you're our guest, so please.
So I think the climax will be Nikaido is in a spot where he has to hit like a hole-in-one or an albatross or some outrageously unlikely shot in order to qualify to the next stage or to win some tournament or whatever. He's managed to use this power to get that far, but then he just has to keep trying this one shot over and over and over again. And for him, like hundreds of years are passing as he just replays this one shot over and over again. And like, that's the hell golf. Like that's the hell of his own creation that he ends up trapped in. He can't let himself give up, but he can't make the shot either. And it just goes over and over and over again. So I don't know. I don't know if Mob can confirm or deconfirm, you know. I don't know if she's thinking you're way off base or if I've somehow manually manage to guess. We will all see soon enough, I'm sure.
We will all soon see it, the audience. Some people may be listening and they're already thinking, what are these guys for fools? Thanks for sharing your insights, Keith. I really like the theory, but it's like you and also Tomato mentioned, let's not spin the tangent too far. Thank you for discussing this point with me a little bit.
I'm going to say my part, even though I said it's going to become rapidly outdated. I'm like a little kid who wants one thing and then gets it and then says, no, I actually want the other thing. No. So in my opinion, I think I get the impression that it's not just going to stop with 5 to 7 seconds back into the past. I think that would just be like Nikaido with a new superpower, and I don't think that's what Fukumoto's stories are about. I think what's going to happen is he's going to go further and further into the past and redo lots and lots of things, and maybe there's going to be some kind of lesson there, as saying that, oh, you managed to redo all of your failures, but it was actually your failures which led you to some of the most wonderful things in your life, like meeting Kasumi. You met her at a bar and like bonded over the fact that you had both failed and you're doing your best, giving it your all in your professional lives. You wouldn't have met those I forget what they refer to themselves as, but those guys who like save him when he's suicidal.
Yeah.
Maybe what's going to happen is he's going to redo everything, and he's not going to meet those people at which he met at the lowest points of his life, but had like a very real connection and had like a very human level of not to repeat myself, just like a true connection, true empathy. Whereas maybe if he ends up being successful and gets everything that he thought that he wanted, he'll realize that actually, well, a lot of a little bit like how Akagi talks about Harada at the end of 10. He's like, yeah, you're successful. All these guys bow down to you, and you have a lot of money and power, and people are scared of you, and people respect you. But what does it mean? They only do that because of the clothes that you're wearing, the kind of violent reputation, money. This is the mask. This is the clothing that Harada is wearing, but it's not really who he is as a person. And so it's kind of dragging him down. He's not able to connect with anyone truly because all they see is Harada, the gang leader. And maybe the same thing will happen with Nikaido. He'll redo everything and he'll actually become a successful golfer. Big success, lots of money, lots of fame and popularity, but he won't be able to form those true connections because everyone just wants to like be his friend, wants the status and like the chance to be around a famous person, and they're just like sucking up to him. Whereas, So sorry, I had to.
No,
I really
it's
wanted
good.
to cut that in, even though I said it's probably going to become outdated.
I mean,
I like this one too.
I want to say mine.
Nikaido is just peak, man. What can I say? It's so fun to think about it and talk about it. To not leave Mob fully out of the conversation in a single yes or no answer. Do you think Kasumi and Nikaido will get together at the very end of the series?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so.
Damn.
There's no way Fukumoto will give a happy ending like this.
Oh,
Fair point.
listening to your theories are very interesting.
Good. All right, guys. Let's segue into the final section of today's podcast episode. And this will all base on, and I know our common denominator is knowledge about Fukumoto works. I mean, we gave the fans what they wanted. We even talked about Route 39 for crying out loud. So we know what's up, all right? But for the final section, it will be a little bit important about what other type of female characters we know in manga and anime. I have a few characters in mind that we could talk about, but maybe, Mob, you have a few female characters in mind that you either enjoy or maybe not enjoy so much in popular shonen or seinen series that you want to compare either Mamiya or any of Fukumoto's female characters in general to?
Yeah, so when you had first put down these plot points for us to think about before the podcast, I spent like the whole week thinking about the characters, because I'm kind of a simple person in that I kind of view manga characters the same way I view people. Like, if a character isn't particularly well written, it's kind of the same way in real life. Some people just kind of have dull personalities. So, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily an issue if a character is well written or not, you know. But in terms of like female characters I can think of, a lot of the female characters from Hunter x Hunter I really enjoy. Like Pakunoda is a good example of that. One character I really like is from the current manga only arc, Theta, just because I think the interaction between her and her she's a bodyguard of a prince, and her interaction with him is very interesting because it's a very scary interpersonal relationship that they have, because this guy is a fucking maniac. He collects body parts. He
Fun.
like is a known serial killer, that kind of thing. And she is, I don't know how well people know Hunter x Hunter, but there's a whole like ability in it that you can awaken in someone if you give them the proper training. And he's just one of those types of characters where he goes through his training incredibly quickly. Like, it's one of those where it takes you usually months to build up, and he gets it like within a week. And he's just a very scary person who has made it very well known that he doesn't think highly of women, and his bodyguard is a woman. So you have to, so it's kind of like a very interesting thing of like putting yourself in the mindset of like, this is a very dangerous situation for her to be in, and that kind of thing. And I guess with Fukumoto, his whole thing is like a psychological element. He's very much in the characters' minds, and that's kind of what makes Fukumoto just a unique writer in general, is that he's very good at like showing someone's step-by-step thought process about something. And it's very hard to compare to, because not a lot of people do that kind of thing where they really like over anally analyze something. Like, Fukumoto's known for like every discard taking like several pages or even a chapter to go through, because these characters just really over analyze everything. And when you read Mamiya, she does the same thing, of she just very like there's what, in the last volume alone, there's like 2 whole chapters where she's basically explaining how it is that she figured out that what Onigashira's Yami tile was that she roamed off of. And it's usually, you don't see that type of thing in series, because they tend to focus more on their story rather than the characters' feelings about a situation. So I think in general, it's hard to think about, like, I mean, there's a lot of female characters I like from manga, but their roles are kind of there more to support the story as a whole, because a lot of them aren't so psychologically based that you really get inside of their head. And Fukumoto's also good with like going between different characters. Like, it's not just the protagonist that we see, but like, for example, you'll see like Osamu behind Mamiya having his own thought process, and then he notices something that she's doing that's like absolutely crazy to him, and he's losing his mind. And then it kind of like, you get a record scratch, and then it switches to her perspective as to what she's doing. And yeah, it's just very difficult, I think, for me personally. I probably have to listen to what you guys think.
Yeah, it's a good starting point.
First.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. It's like we will have a few characters that maybe a few of us know, and then we can bounce around ideas back and forth. Keatstar, who did you have in mind?
Someone who came to mind is another Weekly Shonen Jump series. Do you guys know Akane Banashi? No. I would highly recommend this one. This is my favorite thing running in Jump right now. It's about
yeah. Yes.
It's somewhat similar to Mamiya. It's this teenage girl who's getting into the world of rakugo,
Yes.
becoming a professional rakugoka, you know, the traditional Japanese art of solo storytelling on a stage. So it's a similar dynamic with Mamiya playing Mahjong, where it's typically a very male-dominated world. It's kind of like a harsh and masculine world in some ways, but she has a real knack for it, despite otherwise being like a pretty typical teenage girl. Like she's fashionable and she's silly and she likes joking around and bantering with people. But when, you know, it comes down to her work, her craft of rakugo, she's got just such an immense talent and an immense drive to improve and to succeed in this male dominated world. It's a really, really just great story in general. And I think it's neat that, similar to Mamiya, you know, Weekly Shonen Jump is like a text that's definitely targeted towards men and to young men and teenagers and male teenagers and everything. But I think, like we were saying with Mamiya, they do want to expand that readership more and more. They acknowledge that there's women reading it and there's all sorts of other demographics reading it. And how can we connect with them? How can we give them things that they see themselves in and that are heroes that they really want to root for? So I think it's interesting to see all of these different manga magazines kind of reaching out to across the gender aisle, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, check out Akane. It's a great, great series. I'm really, really enjoying it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed. I think it was like called Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju, like one of the more common rakugo. The anime I watched like back in the day, like 2016 maybe. So when I heard like about Akane Banashi, it got me quite. My interest peaked quite a lot. I think I'll take this as my motivator to start reading it.
Yeah, please do. Yeah. That's a great show too. That was what made me interested in rakugo in the first place. So I'm glad that the tradition of good rakugo manga and anime is continuing.
Oh, thanks for the recommendation. Maybe I'll throw my hat in the ring next, and I'm going to go with the character who I think will be interesting to compare. It's like one of the most classic characters ever from the hands of Rumiko Takahashi, one of the most influential mangakas ever, Ram from Urusei Yatsura. So, I mean, we're talking about one of the I think the original work, it ran like from 1978 to 1987. At the moment, I think since 2022, there has been this remake. And Ram, to the people who are maybe not so familiar with the series, she is an alien, is a Oni-type character who basically believes she is the wife of Ataru, the male main protagonist. And her personality is quite feisty, let's say. But she's oftentimes shown also from her vulnerable side, because, you know, Ataru, he's a complete dick, and I mean, he was also forced a little bit into this entire situation in the first place, and maybe a few of the interactions are difficult to judge because Urusei Yatsura focuses a lot more on comedy than everything else, but the character interactions are genuine. And the feistiness of Ram I do see in characters like Mamiya, but this emotional vulnerability and also feistiness I would see in characters like Kasumi, with the only key difference being Ram's basically relentless chasing of Ataru and basically never giving up. Whereas, you know, Kasumi is more sees more on an eye level with Nikaido, and, you know, is not necessarily chasing him, and there's no, you know, this typical chase of two love interests is not something that is so heavily a topic in any of Fukumoto's works, because of course love in general, if it is featured, you know, like in Gintokin in this small side arc, or Nikaido, it comes as pretty shocking to us. Are some of you familiar with Ram, or have heard of her?
I am, yeah. Yeah.
It's my first time hearing about it.
Then maybe Mob Kitsa, you have a few cents to chip in.
I think there's definitely something to be said about the long-running manga tradition of like girl kind of pops out of nowhere and changes the male protagonist's life forever. And I think it is interesting to think of Kasumi as sort of a subversion of that, where she ought to have changed his life forever. She did for a little bit, and then he couldn't get out of his own way and ruined everything for himself.
Mob, what about you? You have some thoughts about Ram?
Not in particular, no.
All right. I thought also it would be interesting to think because the series, thinking about how old some of Fukumoto's works are. The characters come from quite a similar time. Tomato, do you have anyone particularly in mind?
Are we still talking about notable female characters?
Yeah, in some other works.
Yeah, I've been desperately racking my brain as you three have been talking.
I know your taste, so...
Huh?
I know your typical taste in series, so I know it can be maybe a bit tricky.
I'll tell you my 2 favorite manga instead, and I'll just say how women in general are portrayed, because I think of a very interesting female character that's I'm able to talk about. I'm so familiar with. I'm able to talk about. So I'll just tell women in general in my 2 favorite manga, which are Yamikin Ushijima-kun, also called Ushijima the Loan Shark, and Yomawari Sensei, also in English can be translated as Night Patrol Sensei. So I'll start with Yomawari Sensei. Basically, the main character is Osamu Mizutani. He's a teacher at a night school, and well, you just get like a very realistic depiction of not just women but people in general. He has a wife that sometimes helps to care for wayward kids, and she's portrayed as very nurturing, very sweet. I think overall, it's just very realistic. That a lot of manga, it's very showy, not just the women but the men too. Like everything is very dramatic, very over the top, it wouldn't really happen that way in real life. But in Yomawari Sensei, people just get along and play out whatever happens. I mean, you still have like bad things like drug addiction and involved in a life of crime. That's actually the main issue that the night patrol teacher tries to help with, because he's called the night patrol teacher because he goes out at night and like walks around the town trying to find any kids which are misbehaving. Maybe they're using drugs, they're like some biker gang, maybe like some teenage girl is prostituting herself for whatever reason. Maybe she thinks it's fun, maybe her family is struggling financially. So yeah, just overall a very realistic depiction of people in general, which might be more interesting if we're focusing on female characters, because a lot of the time in these more dramatic over the top manga, you see the men doing all these over the top dramatic stuff and women kind of in the background, like some kind of product. And now moving on to Yamikin Ushijima-kun, that is an extremely bleak, brutal manga where it's about a loan shark who runs his loan sharking company and kind of exploits everyone he can in every way possible. So it shows how vulnerable women are compared to men, due to their just having less power, right? So like if
the
ever
society that it is set in, and that we are also in,
say again, sorry,
because of the society that the story is playing in.
Yeah, society and maybe just biology as well. Men being more aggressive, and that leading to men biologically being more aggressive and physically powerful, and that leading to a society where women have it tougher.
A male-dominated society.
Yeah, and just like whenever a woman is struggling to pay her debts, she normally gets forced into prostitution, which is arguably worse than, well, no, actually, a lot of the men. Yeah, it's just very, very brutal, I guess. So there's that. I don't know why I brought that up. I don't know why I thought it was interesting.
I mean, in general, the way
more realistic, and they give you perspectives on various different walks of life, and so you get stories of men and women alike, and it's more like the arcs are more episodic. Like you can read there's an arc, and then there's another arc, and that sort of follows that focuses on actually one particular character or a group of characters, and then the titular character. So Yomawari Sensei, it's Mizutani Sensei, the Night Patrol Sensei himself, and in Yamiki no Ushijima-kun, it's Ushijima the Lone Shark himself. They actually kind of aren't really focused on. Each arc in both of these series kind of follows the story of one particular person or group of people, and how they interact with the Night Patrol Sensei or Ushijima the Lone Shark. So you get like various different walks of life. You sometimes focus on a man, sometimes a woman, sometimes a male and female couple, like a family. And so you get like a realistic depiction of women. I think that's why I brought it up, because yeah, like I said before, when with Kaiji, for example, it's all about Kaiji, and Kaiji is a guy, so like it's all about Kaiji.
And in general, the depiction of this actually playing maybe this part specifically to Mob and Keatster specifically, do you guys, where do you draw the limit for the realism of the characters that Fukumoto depicts? Is there any character, male or female, that you guys would think would actually exist? Because this is, we know, what your comparison comes down to in the end, Tomato, that, you know, these works try to depict a lot more the gritty, realistic aspects of life. So is there something like this in Fukumoto's works?
Mob, do you have anyone in mind? I'm plumbing my memory banks, but nothing is coming in terms of a Fukumoto character that could exist in reality.
It's like, yeah.
Maybe?
Well, I mean, okay. With Mamiya, I think you'd have to suspend your disbelief a little bit that a high schooler would have the time and like the family arrangement that would let her play Sashi Uma in the middle of the night to like get idols contracts banished. But like her as a character, like a person, I could 100% see existing, because honestly, to me, I think she acts like a teenage girl, or even just like a little girl in general. She honestly, because okay, I work with children in real life, and she honestly acts like a little kid, like under the age of 10. It's very strange. If you like it, okay, not the sexual part, but like everything else with her personality is very much like of a child. She acts extremely childish, like she's just never been told to like act properly, because she's kind of feral too, and that like there's several moments where she just like whacks Osamu, or she like she just like is very physical.
The little
like,
circular fist shaking.
Yeah,
you heard it here from a professional source. Mamiya is childish. Go on.
All right, please continue, Bob.
But yeah, like I do, just in general, like I've said, I think a lot of just characters in general, I don't think that their personalities are really hard to believe that someone would actually be like this, especially in like all of the crazy ass situations that Fukumoto comes up with. Like you could, like, Kaiji acting the way he does, I think is very realistic. Like if if you just had this debt thrown on your shoulder out of nowhere, and then you like had to go on like the espoir, and then like you get your fingers cut off, you get your ear cut off, you get thrown in this really crazy situation where you got these helmets stuck on, or that's not him. What am I talking about? He watching people having these helmets on their head and like being an outsider watching this stuff play out before your eyes. Hell, even the stuff that happens in part 6, I think like them having their very convoluted plan to try to avoid Tei and everything, I think is very realistic. And just like the camaraderie that they have is very, I could see that playing out in real life. So I think that extends to his female characters as well. I think maybe the only ones I can think of are kind of like oh my god, what are those girls from Shin Kurosawa, the college girls? I think one of them's named Bisaki. I don't remember the other one's
Saki.
name.
Yeah, but only Saki
Yeah.
has really interacts really with Kurosawa too much.
Yeah. She's the one that has the main interactions. I think because, like I've said, Fukumoto kind of writes women in a goofy way. Like they're so overly goofy all the time that maybe that could be considered unrealistic. But I also don't think that it's that strange either. Like I don't think that it comes off as like so inhuman with their interactions. Like maybe it's a little overdone, like you said, with like Mamiya shaking her fist. I don't know how many people would do that in real life, but I also don't think that it's very weird either.
Let me just quickly jump on this train and say the character interactions, in general, not looking at the full characters, you need to suspend your belief every now and then. But one reason why I enjoy it, guys, I have to say I like Shin Kurosawa. Otherwise, it wouldn't be Wizomi being one of the hosts here. The realisticness, the realness of the character interactions in Shin Kurosawa are really, really prominent, and I do think it's paints a specific picture about Shin Kurosawa that she was one of the characters that you thought of thinking of more realistic characters, because a lot of those interactions I can see people like actually Koinosuke existing, the entire arc around Che Guevara helping out the homeless people. But this is before I go on too much of a tangent. One of the reasons I like Shin Kurosawa is this depiction of the realistic characters and character interactions. And one thing I basically synthesize and take away from our discussion about other female characters is that we can quite clearly pinpoint what type of characters or situations Fukumoto doesn't really go into that deeply. He doesn't go into, super deep and real gruesome depictions of he does show like torture that's happening, but it's usually still some sort of whimsical torture device and not just the pure harshness of reality that he shows. He also doesn't really, and it's a one archetype we haven't really talked about, but because it isn't really seen in Fukumoto works, it's just the super typical moe characters. I'm thinking of like Lucky Star, you have characters that are just pure moe. Fukumoto, at least to my knowledge, has never written something like this. I really like Lucky Star at that point. It's not something like I see as negative or not, but yeah, we do still see some certain characteristics of these also very old characters like Ram that were written a long time ago, reflected in some of his works. But overall, the women in Nobuyuki Fukumoto's works are quite unique, so to say. And before we go to the closing thoughts, I have one thing on my mind that I thought that I wanted to really discuss with you guys. Maybe we just write it off quite quickly, but it's unfortunately something I see that happens quite a lot, and maybe we can combine it with today's topic of female characters. The big problem is that I have never actually watched or read anything of it, but the one thing that Fukumoto's Gamble works get compared to so often is Kakegurui. Has any one of you guys seen or read any of that?
No.
I haven't.
I tried watching it because I had heard it compared to Fukumoto. it's pretty different.
Yeah, Kitsa, I want to hear your opinion because I have not watched it because I'm, but I feel like people, we are all Fukumoto enjoyers. Of course, our immediate response is, how dare you think anything that doesn't go as deeply into the mind games and is not as gritty and edgy? How dare you even try to watch something like this? But people genuinely think that the female characters in Kakegurui, they are on lists of like well-written female characters. So people think this, but I want please, what are your thoughts, Keatster?
Yeah, like it does have the Fukumoto-esque element of, okay, we're doing a gamble, but there's a couple twists, and we're going to very thoroughly kind of consider the ramifications of, okay, well, what if you can notice slight discrepancies between the card backs? It has that sense of minutia, and it certainly has the sense of like, how does the psychology unfold from these gambling elements? But at least in the TV show, this is all kind of in service of making like a really kind of cool, sexy, seductive underworld where she's portrayed as this like super over the top kind of like gambling sadist. And it feels like the big difference for me is that all of the gambling is just sort of a pretense to kind of be like, wow, such is the depth of her genius and the depth of her manipulation. Whereas in Fukumoto, I kind of feel like the gamble itself is the point to some extent. Like, there's nothing super particularly badass about Akagi discarding the Tuso. They don't make it really look cool. It just kind of emerges from his hand. But it's cool to us because we have become so invested.
I was
in
about to say, like, yeah, man, heck yeah, he discards that Tuso.
Hell yeah, dude, what a bold discard!
Yeah,
right?
it's like what if Washizu would have pawned that ton? It sticks with me, but inherently, it's just mahjong tiles.
And I think that is like a key difference when you compare the female characters too. Like, the female lead here is very sexy and over the top, and there's like a lot of kind of fan servicey stuff about her getting kind of like a sexual pleasure from gambling. And then Fukumoto does his own equivalent of a female lead, and Mamiya certainly I don't think is really presented as, fan servicey, and there's like kind
Except
of sexual
maybe
jokes
like one
and
page,
banter. But it's all kind of like dismissed, and okay, well, let's just focus on the mahjong tiles. That's what we're really here to see.
Exactly. Thanks for thanks for the input, Kitsa. Now I have this check mark on my bucket list of publicly hating on Kakegurui. I know you spoke very neutrally, but yeah, I have not consumed it. I will not watch it. Does it even have a manga? I don't know. I don't care about it. But I thought some people that are listening may want to hear this comparison. So thank you for bringing it up. I already, or going into this brought up by me, I already started a little bit with, closing statements. So I think we got myself covered. I think we should end off the closing statements with our guests. So maybe Tomato, synthesizing the last 2 hours of excellent discussion. Do you have any final thoughts on your mind regarding any of the points discussed today?
I'm going to be a gentleman and say ladies first. Mob, what do you think? I'm still thinking.
Well, let me see.
Otherwise, ladies first. Keatster, after you.
Sure. I had one thing in mind that when we first proposed this topic, I was like, well, maybe this is like a framing I could suggest. Where basically at the end of the day, I feel like Fukumoto simply just doesn't think about women all that much in general. Focuses on, like I said, his focus is on the gamble, on the games, on the minutiae of social interactions. And these questions of femininity or how women are portrayed feel very secondary to him. But what I think is so cool in manga, and I think this is truer of manga than any other medium, is like your subconscious manifests itself just by drawing. That even if Fukumoto didn't really think too hard about, what should this female character look like, how should they act, how should they speak, what kind of personality should they have, even if those were kind of secondary thoughts to their role in the story. All of those things just naturally emerge as you're drawing the character, as you're bringing them to life. So I think kind of asking these questions about mangaka, where it's like, maybe they, like, we may have given more thought to women in Fukumoto just tonight than Fukumoto himself has in writing all these series.
Yeah.
But I think it's still very valid. I think it's very interesting to kind of plumb those depths.
Yeah. Well said, and I also thought of this a little bit, that, man, at least this, at the end of the day, this will be the biggest deep dive into women in Fukumoto's work, at least available to the general public ever at this point. Mob.
Well, I guess to also add to that point, with Fukumoto, I think more of what he focuses on is just the human nature of things anyway. Because, like, Kurosawa, for example, that's one of my favorite works of his, the original Kurosawa. I like Shin Kurosawa, but I think it and Part 1 are completely different from each other.
Yeah.
They're almost like fundamentally different works. And the beauty about the original Kurosawa, like I said, when I first read it, I was like 16-year-old girl versus 45-year-old man, but I could still resonate with it, even though like we're on two completely opposite ends of like the spectrum in terms of societally being like people, you know, two completely different people, but I can still relate to and also feel some sympathy and also kind of be like, damn, dude, you're a bit of a degenerate while reading it. Like, there's a level of enjoyability you get from it, and relatability, even if the character that you're reading about isn't like you know, like even if you aren't in the same demographic as this person, even if you're two completely different people fundamentally, like the stuff that he explores, like the life clock analogy, and just I actually reread this one section of Kurosawa specifically for this podcast where it's the section where Nakane and those two girls invite him to um that hotel that's got
The
all
pool,
of the
right?
Azasu. That's where he gets invited to, and he like is surrounded by all these women, and he like basically just starts creeping on all of them. And Nakane has to save his hide, and then after he goes to the bathroom to lament about it, he's basically like, when you take a man that's like, what was it? I think he said it was like a child that has hardly eaten any breakfast, and you give him a lot of food, he just
Yes.
consumes all of it at once.
Yes.
Or like, you give him a lot of sweets and he just latches on to it. And just like watching him just like, I guess, go through his own mentality and stuff, you're both disgusted, but you're also like, I can kind of see how you can arrive to this point. Like if you've been so beaten down by society and not having a lot of interpersonal relationships, that can be a very true result
Yeah.
that ends up happening. I think it's just a very interesting way to go about it. Like even if you can't personally relate, you can still be like, oh, this is a really interesting view into someone's psyche. And that applies with Mamiya as well. Like it really wouldn't have mattered fundamentally if she's a male or a female, because all she is just a very smart mahjong gambler who admittedly does trick her opponents a little bit, but ultimately there is a high degree of logic in what she's doing. And like, I guess if you were to really hyper focus on the fact that she's female, it's kind of like a woman knowing how to play mahjong and being smart in mahjong doesn't make her anything special because she's a woman. So why would it really be special for a female protagonist? Something like that, like a manga character. Why would it matter inherently if she's female or not?
Yeah.
I just think the dynamic is very interesting. I do like younger female, older male type of dynamics, the one that she has not only with Onigashira but Osamu as well. And it's really interesting considering that this is supposed to be like the first part of Mamiya. I don't know why this is the first part. There's still been no confirmation for a second one as of recording this. But it'd be really interesting to see like how it is that her relationship developed with Osamu, because she likes him. I mean, it says at the end of the manga that she actually loves him. So it's like, does she love him for a familial sense? Is there something that she's lacking in her family? Does she not have a good positive role model? Does she see him as a friend? What exactly is it that she sees in Osamu? Because with Osamu, we already know a little bit. It's just that he thinks of her as being like a stand-in for Akagi, whether that be like he still hasn't gotten over the trauma of him dying, or maybe he doesn't have his own family to attach to. What is it exactly that these two see in each other? It'd be really nice to see like how this relationship develops onward.
Yeah, very well put, Mob. Ending things off on that final statement, I like that we started off with Mamiya, and I feel like it's only very fitting to end off with it. Mamiya basically shows that, Fukumoto is not necessarily trying to break genre norms of his usual stuff with a feminist lead. Instead, he's creating a character that's strong and competent without needing to address, the femininity all too much. It could make her empowering in this sense to some audiences. We had different interpretations of her and how she acts, but of course, it does limit a little bit the exploration of her as a distinctly female character, but that's also not really what it's supposed to do. So maybe she's not a feminist figure outright, but her existence challenges Fukumoto's male-dominated character tradition. And she shows that a female lead can bring some intensity, some more bickering, bantering, without altering the core themes of what Fukumoto has started off writing in the very beginning, thinking about family, thinking about the place where you belong, being comparable to how Mamiya thinks about Osamu at the end. Does that wrap things up with a little bow tie?
I think so. I think Mob really hit the nail on the head when she said a little bit earlier that Fukumoto is all about exploring human nature, more so than masculinity or femininity or male-female dynamics.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think it might invalidate our discussion a little bit, which was supposed to be about female themes and the depiction of female characters.
It's food for thought. Food for thought.
Yeah, food for thought. I think, very well put. It doesn't really affect the story of Mamiya.
Yeah.
Mamiya being female or male. Although I do think it is refreshing to see something new.
Brilliant.
Definitely.
Then I want to give one big thanks to our fantastic guests, both for all the time they took for preparing, but also for recording with us today. Thank you, Kitsa. Thank you, Mob. And I invite the audience, of course, to share any of their ideas in the comments below. Have any more thoughts? Did we miss any female Fukumoto character in our little lightning round? And otherwise, I would see everyone in the next episode of Jongers by Nature. Thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.